What's up, everyone? Welcome to chapter 6, which is employee selection. My friends, that is what we're going to today. All right, when we're talking about selection in human resource management, we're really just talking about the most critical process in shaping the success of the organization. Selection is not merely just about filling vacancies, it's about strategically choosing individuals who do not have who not only have the necessary qualifications, but also align with the company's values, vision, and culture. A well-exhaustive selection process leads to increased productivity, better job satisfaction, and reduces turnover. On the flip side, a poor selection decision can be costly both in terms of financial resources as well as organizational morale. The key to an effective selection process lies in the understanding of the nature of job opening. So whether it's an existing role that someone left or a newly created one due to organizational expansion, both of them require the best selection process. Now, existing roles have clearly defined expectations, while new roles might require more strategic approach considering long-term growth or compliance with diversity and inclusion standards. So it's not about picking the best person in an abstract sense. It is about finding the right person for this specific role in this specific organization at this specific point in time. That person may have hard to measure qualities like adaptability, cultural fit, or growth mindset, which may not always be obvious on a resume. Also, you have to remember that selection process is part of the broader talent management cycle, and it's interconnected with recruitment. It's interconnected with onboarding, with performance management, and succession planning. That ripple effect of great selection decisions is felt. So that ripple effect of this great selection decision is actually felt across these entire stages. So the figure here is a fundamental understanding of the true objective of any selection system. So making accurate predictions about job performances. In this matrix, we're evaluating how well we predict success or how well predicted success aligns with actual job performance. So the goal is simple but powerful. We want to maximize the number of hits and minimize the number of misses. Let's unpack each quadrant. On the top right quadrant, you'd see that we have the hit, which is the ideal scenario. And the organization predicts high performance, hires the individual, and the individual delivers. That's a win. In the bottom left, we also have a hit, but it's the opposite case. We predict someone won't succeed, and in fact, they wouldn't have. While the person doesn't get the job, the system worked correctly in filtering them out. So both these scenarios show that your selection method is doing a good job making accurate decisions. In the top left corner is a miss. Now, a miss is a painful consequence. You reject someone based on your selection process, but they actually would have done an excellent job. And this represents lost potential, talents you missed out on. If this happens frequently, it means that your process may be too rigid or too flawed, overlooking high potentials. This is especially relevant when the selection systems are not inclusive or when they rely too heavily on standardized metrics that fail to capture true capabilities like resilience, emotional intelligence, and/or creativity. In the bottom right, you have another type of miss. So you hire someone because your system predicts success, but they end up performing poorly. This is arguably the most dangerous miss. Not only does it affect productivity, but it also hurts team morale and costs the company time and money and rehiring and retraining. These errors often come from relying too much on gut feeling, poorly constructed interviews, or irrelevant tests. Every selection process begins with one essential question. What exactly are you hiring for? That's where job analysis comes in, and job analysis is the foundation upon which effective hiring, training, performing evaluation, and compensation systems are built. If we skip this step or do it poorly, everything that follows is based on shaky ground. Job analysis identifies the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics that are necessary for this role. Think of knowledge as what a person needs to know, skills as what they need to be able to do, abilities as their enduring capabilities, and other characteristics, things like personality, values, or certifications. So, for example, a sales manager might need knowledge of a CRM system, the skills in negotiations, the ability to lead a team, and a high tolerance for ambiguity. Without these levels of clarity, hiring decisions can make inconsistent. We can make it to be inconsistent and biased. So the selection process is not a one-size-fits-all formula. It's a sequence of steps that should be customized to the position and organizational context. So that said, there are common things that nearly all organizations follow, starting from the initial gathering of the data to the final hiring process. So the first step involves gathering information. This is often done through a resume and application forms, which provide a snapshot of a candidate's education, work history, and sometimes specific qualifications. But while these documents are useful, they can also be very misleading. People often overstate achievements or fail to highlight the qualities that matter most to the job. That is why it's critical to validate this information through additional steps. So the next thing you have is tests, interviews, tests, medical exam, background checks, all these things. Each one has a specific purpose. Now, interviews help access communication and interpersonal fit, at least assess it. The test, especially cognitive or job knowledge tests, can provide objective insight into candidates' abilities. Medical exams and drug tests are typically conducted later in the process and must comply with the legal standards, such as the Americans with Disabilities Act. And you have background checks, which are essential for verifying education, prior employment, and potential red flags, especially for roles involving security, finance, or vulnerable population. This figure visualizes the selection process as a step-by-step ladder, which can be a useful metaphor. Now, each step brings us closer to the final decision, and importantly, each step is an opportunity to eliminate mismatched candidate. So you want to think about it as a filtration system, gradually moving the pool until only the strongest candidates remain. So we begin with the resume submission, and then we end with the hiring decision. Reliability and validity are the concerns of any scientifically sound reflection system. So reliability refers to consistency. So if an interview or a test is reliable, it produces the same result under the same or consistent conditions. So for example, if two trained interviewers evaluate the same candidate, they should each reach the same conclusion. If they don't, your process has low intra-rate relatability, and your hiring decisions may be arbitrary. Relatability, in this case also includes test-related reliability. So if someone takes the cognitive ability test on Monday and takes it again on Friday under similar conditions, their score should be nearly the same. Now, validity is about accuracy. So does the test produce actual measures that what it's supposed to measure? So for example, if you're hiring a data analyst, does your math test predict what they will analyze, how they'll analyze the data in the real world situation? This is called predictive validity, and there are also content validity, which asks whether the test reflects the actual job. A good work sample test for a graphic designer might ask the candidate to design a logo, not solve a logic puzzle. Initial screening is a critical gatekeeping mechanism and it's a selection process. In this stage, we're not yet looking for a perfect candidate, we're trying to quickly and efficiently filter out those clearly not that do not meet the criteria or the basic qualifications. This isn't just about efficiency, it's about cost control and time optimization. So interviewing takes time, and time is money, especially when multiple decision makers are involved. So the goal of the initial screening is to prevent unqualified candidates from progressing through the rest of the pipeline. This helps keep later steps like the interviews and the testing focused and effective. Now, screening typically involves comparing the applicant's credential against the minimum job requirements, such as education, qualifications, certifications, years of experience, or legal eligibility to work. Candidates who do not meet these cannot and should not move forward. But this step isn't just about exclusion, it's about protecting organizations' energy. Every unqualified candidate you push through the funnel wastes internal resources. Even more critically, it can lead to flawed decisions in the hiring process and overwhelmed by too many poor choices. There are several tools available for the screening phase, and the most common are resumes and cover letters, which offer an overview of education, work history, achievement. However, they're often inconsistent in format and content, which is why many employers use structured applications to forms to gather this standardized data. Internet checks, so looking at candidates' online presence, can be useful but also problematic. There's a fine line between doing your due diligence and violating someone's privacy or introducing bias as well. Photo and video screening are becoming increasingly common, especially for more remote to high volume roles. These methods allow the employees to access verbal communication, enthusiasm, and alignment with the company's tone and cultures. And then you have video resumes. While still emerging, they are creative tools that allow applicants to showcase soft skills that might not come across in writing. So, for example, a customer service role might benefit from seeing how a person speaks and represents themselves, and that would be good to have on video. This grid is a practical example of how organizations can objectively evaluate resumes and application. By using a standardized scoring system, typically 1 to 5, a hiring team can assess both the quantitative requirements, such as hard skills and credentials, and qualitative attributes, soft skills and behaviors in a structured way. This makes the selection process more defensible and replicable. The quantitative data often include things like education levels, qualifications, years of relevant experience, or specific technical capabilities. More nuanced, however, the qualitative data, interpersonal skills, integrity, coaching abilities, and presentation skills. These require interface and judgment, often pulled from the resume language, past job description, and even tone of cover letter. That is why it's critical that the scorers are trained to assess these qualities consistently. So ideally, multiple reviewers will assess the same applications to boost intra-rate reliability. Interviews are by far the most widely used selection tools, yet paradoxically, they're among the least predictive when used poorly. So despite this, firms rely heavily on interviews because they serve multi-purpose, not just assessment, but also branding, building, relationship creation, and candidate engagement. The issue is that many interviewers are unstructured, which means that they lack consistency. Different interviewers ask different questions, rate responsive subjectively, and let personal bias get into their decision. This makes interviews poor predictors of job performance unless we apply structure and discipline. Structured interviews are preset questions tied directly to job competencies and are far more reliable. Behavioral questions like tell me about a time you handled a conflict at work, or situations like what would you do if, are proven to yield the better predictive validity. These should be paired with a scoring rubric that guides the interviewers in evaluating answers against clear performance standards. So why do these organizations still use interviews? Well, because they're practical, especially when you have a small pool of active candidates. They allow for real-time communication, a read on cultural fit, and they give the candidate a chance to ask questions. Interviewers interviews also serve strategic branding purposes. They are one of the first direct impression of the candidate has of your company. Employment interviews is not conducted in a vacuum. It shapes the constellation of variables. So you've got context, individual, and procedures that collectively influence the final hiring decisions. We're going to begin with the application. The application brings the knowledge, skills, ability, and other characteristics, but also their education, prior experiences, and even expectation of the presentations. Then you have nonverbal cues like posture, eye contact, and vocal tone, which can influence how the answers are interpreted. And let's not ignore the influence of the demographic variable, age, sex, race, whether consciously or unconsciously. Now, these can affect the dynamics in a subtle or overt ways. Understanding the different types of interviews is essential for designing a hiring process that both is fair and effective. Each type serves different purposes and varies in structure. So structure, objectivity, and predictive power. Selecting the right type depends on the job. So the hiring goal and the stage of the interview process. Non-predictive interview is often maximizes flexibility and allows candidates to speak freely and guide the conversation. While it can be useful to be creative or exploratory, it has a very low reliability rate. Structured interviews are highly standardized. Everyone's asked the same questions in the same order, and answers are evaluated using scoring rubric. And this format is increasing in predictivity and validity and fairness. It's practically effective when assessing technical skills, problem solving, or role-specific knowledge. Situational interviews use hypothetical scenarios to assess how candidates would behave in a future situation. Other formats like sequential interviews, candidates meet different interviewers one after the other, and panel interviews where you have multiple interviewers evaluating a single candidate together to help bring in multiple perspectives. Interviewing has evolved far beyond the traditional face-to-face model. In today's global tech-enabled world, video and phone interviews are not just convenient, they're actually pretty essential. These methods break down geographic barriers, allowing companies to access a broader and more diverse talent pool. They're also an efficient way of screening large numbers of candidates, reducing travel costs, and spending up time to hire. So with video interviews, we're looking at visuals and vocal cues that you wouldn't have otherwise. You can assess the professionalism, communication skills, and confidence without needing to be in the same room. Computer-administered automated interviews, these are gaining traction, especially for high volume hiring. These systems are preset questions delivered via kiosks or online platforms. While this is scalable, they can also come with a trade-off. The biggest downside is the lack of flexibility, so recruiters can't probe deeper to follow up on interesting responses. There are also the concern that applicants feel disconnected, reducing their enthusiasm for the job as well. One of the most overlooked aspects of interviewing is legal compliance, especially diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Equal Opportunity Commission provides a clear guideline for what questions should not be asked in this interview. This is not a matter of fairness. It's a legal issue with serious consequences if ignored. Questions related to race, color, sex, religion, sexual orientation, national origin, or caregiving status can lead to charges of discrimination, even if they are unintentional. So for example, asking, do you have kids? Or where you're originally from may seem innocent, but they can cross legal lines and put the organization at risk. The safest and smartest approach is only ask questions that are job related. If the information does not help you evaluate someone's ability to perform their duties or their role, don't ask it. Use structured interviews and stick to your rubric. Now, also ensure the same questions are asked to all the candidates to avoid inconsistency that can be constructed as bias. Post-interview screening. So the interview is not just the final words in the selection. In fact, post-interview screening is one of the most critical qualities for checkpoint. So critical quality control checkpoint before an offer is extended. So once a candidate appears to be a good fit based on an interview, employers must verify the story of the candidate presented aligns with the objective reality. So this step is about risk mitigation and due diligence. And this phase involves confirming details such as previous employment, educational credentials, certifications, and sometimes legal ability to work. Now, this step can involve deeper investigation into candidates' behavioral patterns or past performance, not just whether they worked at certain places, but how they worked. Did they receive performance awards? Are there any red flags? And so forth. Reference checks are more than a formality, they're also an essential validation tool. When done correctly, they offer insight that no resume, test, or interview can fully reveal. Think of them as your opportunity to get a 360-degree view of the candidate's past work behaviors, habits, and impact. Organizations typically perform references checks through phone calls or to former supervisors or colleagues, and in some cases, written references letters. Phone checks tends to be more revealing because they follow up questions and clarifications, but it's important to ask job-related structural questions, not vague inquiries like, what was she like? Instead, can you describe a time when this person handled conflict at work? Next up, we have background checks. And background check is the legal doctrine that employments cannot afford to ignore. If an employee fails to discover a history of violence, fraud, or misconduct that later results in harm, the company may be held liable. This is where background checks become indispensable. They serve as a safety net, ensuring you exercise reasonable diligence in your hiring decision. Background checks typically cover criminal histories, employment verification, educational record, and in some industries, credit report or driving records. But here are some key things that you should look for. So they must be done with full transparency and consent. Employers are legally required to obtain clear written or authorization, from candidates before conducting the background check. Pre-employment tests are among the most objective and scalable tools we have in talent selection. They offer measurable data points on candidates and candidates' KSAO, which is a knowledge as well, and allows a fair comparison across applicants. When used properly, they help reduce bias, increase accuracy, and save costs by narrowing down the pool before interviews. These tests, they may access cognitive ability, technical knowledge, personality traits, or even value alignment. What makes them powerful is their standardization. Every candidate faces the same challenge under the same conditions, which increases the fairness and productivity validity. And so these tests do have their drawbacks. Legal risks are real, especially if the test disproportionately excludes candidates from protected groups. So employers must demonstrate that their tests are valid for the role, meaning they actually predict the job performance. So if a test doesn't align with the job tasks, it may challenge as discriminatory under the Title 8 in the Civil Rights Act. Now, there are different types of tests. You have job knowledge tests, which measures the candidate's ability to specific subject matters. These are best used for roles that require technical skills, such as accounting, software engineering, or regulatory compliance. Work sample tests are practically powerful. They simulate actual tasks that the candidates will face on the job. So a graphic designer may be asked to create a layout, while a programmer may be asked to solve a coding problem. These tests are high face validity, have a very high face validity. And then assessment centers, they're more complex and use primary managerial roles, These simulated real-world challenges through exercises like group discussions, case studies, and or role play. Cognitive ability tests assess reasoning, memory, mathematical aptitude, verbal skills, and problem-solving capacities. These are some of the strongest predictors of job performance, especially in roles that require decision-making. Why, you may ask? Well, because general mental ability, often referred to as G, underlines the ability to learn, adapt, and handle novel challenges. These tests are efficient and cost-effective, but they can unintentionally produce adverse impacts if not carefully validated and paired with other tools. Next up is personality tests, and they are designed to measure stable traits such as conscientiousness, openness, emotional stability, agreeableness, and extroversion, often using the five-factor model. While they don't predict task performance as directly as cognitive tests, they are valuable for assessing team fit, leadership potential, and cultural alignment. And then the last thing that we have is emotional intelligence assessment and emotional intelligence assessment. I feel like I'm missing one. Okay, get back to it. Emotional test, it's not on there, but emotional assessment, intelligent assessment refers to a person's ability to receive, manage, and regulate emotions. Okay. All right. Biographical data draws on candidates' past behaviors and life experiences to predict futures and performance. They might ask about hobbies, past jobs, and how one handles specific situations. Integrity tests are designed to assess the candidate's honesty, trustworthiness, and likelihood of engaging in counterproductive behaviors such as theft, absenteeism, and rule breaking. Physical ability tests is another one, and physical ability tests are relevant when physical strength, stamina, or coordination is a bona fide occupational requirement. So, for example, firefighting, law enforcement, or warehouse work, they need to be physically fit for these positions. These are some examples that you could look at of cognitive ability tests. Physical ability test, that's just the one we just talked about. You're looking at lifting, endurance, speed, agility, and coordination. Medical examinations are sensitive and must comply with the laws of the American with Disability Act. And these evaluations can be administered after a conditional job offer has been extended. So the goal is not to discriminate, but to ensure that the candidate can safely perform the job or determine if accommodations are needed. Drug tests remain a controversial issue, so while they are legal in many jurisdictions, their effectiveness as predictors of workplace safety and productivity is debatable. Some argue that drug testing can be invasive and may not measure impairment, only past use. However, in industries like transportation or healthcare, where safety is critical, these tests are more common and often required by law. Now, moving on to one of the most critical aspects of testing, which is validity. Validity refers to how well a test measures what it claims to measure. So in HR, that means how accurately a test predicts the job performance. The first type, criterion-related validity, evaluates whether the test scores correlate with performance criteria such as productivity, sales, or supervisor rating. These two forms of criterion-related validity there are two forms. One is concurrent validity, and the other one is predictive validity. Concurrent validity looks at whether current employees' test scores align with their job performance. For example, if a high-performing employee score higher on a reasoning test, that might be useful for selecting future candidates. Predictive validity, on the other hand, is forward-looking, so it involves administering the test to applicants and then measuring their performance later on in the job. Regardless of which method you use, you can do something called cross-validation, and it's essential. This means testing the tools again with a different sample to ensure the results aren't due to chance. So if you test your work in one group but not another, it might not be reliable. All right. To content and structural construct validity. Two other important ways to evaluate a test when you're talking about content validity, that assesses whether the content of the test reflects the knowledge of the skills required by the job. So, for example, a typing test for administrative assistance has a strong content validity if typing is a core part of the job. Construct validity, on the other hand, digs deeper, looks whether a test measures theoretical traits like intelligence, anxiety, or mechanical reasoning. So construct validity is essential for tests that measure personality or mental ability. At this point of the hiring process, you've gathered a substantial amount of data from various sources, interviews, tests, reference checks, background checks, and more. So the question now becomes, how do we synthesize all this information into a well-informed, equitable, and strategic hiring decisions? Now, there are multiple approaches for structuring this decision-making process. The selection of appropriate one depends on the nature of the job. So organization's culture, and level of risk involved with poor hiring choices. One approach is compensatory model, where strength is one area can offset weaknesses in another. And so there's like a compensation going on. This is essentially especially useful in roles where multifaceted skills are required and flexibility in candidate profile is beneficiary. Um, the other thing is it's critical to recognize weighing of different components. So, for example, in leadership roles, personality and motivations carry more weight than technical roles where specific knowledge and skills dominate the decision. Once all the data is there and gathered, the challenge becomes organizing and interpreting it effectively. So, summary forms and checklists serve as tools to make this process systematic. They help reduce decision fatigue and ensure consistency across all candidates by standardizing the way we evaluate components like job knowledge, communication, and leadership. So, evaluation should focus on what the applicants can do, their technical competencies, and will do, their motivations and value. Too often we're tempted to base our decisions solely on likability or gut instinct. While rapport matters, we must resist overvaluing it and instead anchor our decisions in evidence. So candidate evaluation form, this figure is an example of a structured evaluation form, and it reduces rating or includes rating for both hard and soft skills, education, job knowledge, communication skills, leadership abilities, and more. If you notice, there is an emphasis both quantitative and qualitative comments. Numbers alone can give you a false sense of objectivity. They are not really good. They need more of the qualitative as well. Here we see the framework for thinking about candidates and evaluation, the distinction between the can and will do factors. Can do refers to candidates' knowledge, skills, and abilities, essentially their ability to do the job. Will do reflects the personality, values, and motivation as well. When organizations move to the decision-making phase, they must acknowledge that no one size fit all exists. This approach can be used to scale a research scientist. This approach used to select a research scientist, for example, may not be suitable for hiring a customer service representative. They have to have different process. So we're going to begin with the question, the potential versus the immediate fit. Should we hire someone who meets all the current job requirements or someone who with high potential for future growth? The answer depends on the organization's goal. If you're scaling quickly or need succession planning, you may prioritize potential. But if the role demands immediate expertise, job fit takes precedence. Compensation level is another key consideration. If you hire someone with qualifications beyond the position's scope, they may become dissatisfied or leave. On the flip side, hiring underqualified candidates because they fit with your budget can result in performance issues and higher training costs. So here we have two decision-making models. The critical approach and the statistical approach both have their place, and understanding their strength and limitation is essential. The clinical approach relies on expert judgment. So managers review the data, consider the context, and make the decision based on their intuition and experience. The statistical approach is data-driven, so each predictor, tests, scores, experiences, interview rating is weighted, and the final decision is based on that formula. The figure here visualizes how test scores um, relate to job success cutoffs. So the x-axis represents the test scores, low to high, and the y-axis represents the job performance, unsatisfactory to satisfactory. The final hiring decisions where all prior steps converge, and the process shifts from analysis to action. In most organizations, the hiring manager and the supervisor have the final say. However, this decision must be coordinated with HR, which ensures legal compliance, clarity, and consistency in the job offer. Now, the HR department plays a vital role in documenting offer details, so wages, hours, locations, benefits, and expected start date. It's essential that this information is communicated clearly and in writing to avoid any misinterpretation. For internal candidates, the process can be more personal. For external candidate, a formal written offer is standard piece of practice, but equally important in following up with those who were not selected. So silence damages employers' branding and leaves candidates with negative impression. All right, my friends, that is it for today. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. If you have any questions, please let me know. And until then, I will see you in the next episode, or I will see you in the next lecture. Bye for now.